I stood outside the bedroom door and listened intently. The noises coming from inside hinted at a situation that was definitely not what I wanted to hear. My wife was engaged in a heated argument with someone who was not me. Most people would find it difficult to control their anger in this situation, especially if they were already holding a Beretta 92 FS with a silencer, like I was. If I really wanted to, I could barge into the room and incapacitate them both within seconds. They wouldn't even have a chance to react before falling unconscious, and then death would come shortly after. Our van in the garage would be able to transport all three bodies, and I could easily take them to a boat and sail offshore to a point where the water was thousands of feet deep. That's where I would dispose of the weighted corpses. I've done it countless times before, and none of them have ever come back to haunt me. However, I knew that I couldn't take that path. It would ultimately lead to my own demise. You see, I happen to be what they call a hitman, and I'm not talking about topping the music charts. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation in the first place. It all started on a hillside in Afghanistan. My comrade and I were on a solo patrol, and we found ourselves chasing mujahideen into a complex of caves. I stripped down to my vest, carrying only a pistol and a knife. To protect my hearing, I used a suppressor. Armed with just a set of night vision goggles, I navigated through the entire cave complex, shooting anyone who posed a threat. That's why they call me the Hatchet Man. I would go in and eliminate every single one of them. It might come as a shock to those of you living in a comfortable bubble, shaped by emotional movies and promises made by your leaders, but in a war zone, almost everyone becomes a combatant. Consider the options faced by people living outside the privileged realms of America or Europe, where cheap consumer goods, functioning police forces, and semi-stable governments are the norm. The majority of humanity lives hand to mouth, just as it did 2 million years ago. The average IQ on Earth is comparable to a Labrador that can open doors, essentially. Ignorant people can be arrogant because they lack the understanding to see beyond their own level. They think only in the short term, making them prone to criminal behavior or betrayal. Now picture yourself as a woman growing up in an Afghan village. Your best hope for a decent life is to marry one of the simple-minded opium farmers who will take you to his humble abode. There you would work tirelessly while he spends his days reading the Quran, engaging in questionable activities, and smoking hashish. You are with him simply because he would fight to the death to protect you, seeing you as his possessed possession, even if he doesn't truly love you or views you as something less than human. Feminism is a distant concept that holds no sway in the face of harsh Afghan reality. Its existence in the civilized world is only tolerated because we allow it. In the modernized world, we don't engage in such barbaric acts. Instead, we indulge in casual relationships at bars filled with mind-numbing music and ridiculously priced alcohol. We don't have the Quran, but we have civil rights and free markets. In the end, we are not so different from the people we mock and ridicule. We might be a little smarter, richer, and more organized, but the rest is just a facade, and it sickens me to the core. In the third world, the term government refers to people who are authorized to steal from you. Many aspire to join the ranks of the government because it comes with titles, uniforms, and most importantly, the power to kill without consequence. That power also allows them to demand money from others. It's not much different from our corporate lawyers, except that it leads to rampant violence and destruction. In order to protect yourself and your children from becoming victims of unimaginable horrors, you need a violent, primitive man armed with a weapon. That's the harsh reality. But before you climb onto your high horse and condemn the uncivilized nature of these people, take a good look around you. It's not so different in our supposedly civilized world. We all rely on someone willing to work tirelessly in a job they don't enjoy, just so we can have a safe home, food that won't poison us, and maybe even some time to pursue our dreams. We have built pockets of paradise in a world that is mostly hellish, even if most people are oblivious to it. For instance, go to one of those Afghan villages and ask a man living in a makeshift shelter, surviving off meager supplies and eating unhealthy food, if he truly believes he's being oppressed. He would probably say that he's doing pretty well considering his roofed ditch a luxury that puts him ahead of many others, whom he spits at on the street. He dreams of owning 25 goats someday, which would be the pinnacle of success for him. Having been all around the world in my line of work, killing people who didn't want to die and were skilled at evading death, I can tell you that it's the same everywhere. That's why, when you find yourself in a cave complex, you shoot anyone who poses a threat, even if they could be considered innocent in a relative sense. being in a Taliban stronghold alone is enough to cast a dark shadow of suspicion, even on the goats. I've encountered too many colleagues who fell prey to Afghan children, foolishly dismissing the danger until it was too late, and the children would smile, offering them death in the form of a hand grenade. In that moment, they would no longer worry about being exploited or searching for their next meal. Instead, they would become celebrated heroes, quickly forgotten a mere day later. In the third world, that's equivalent to winning the lottery for their families, who would receive enough money to buy a used car, which is practically a fortune in those parts. You might label me a sociopath, but I believe that I simply see things for what they truly are. Deep down, you know I'm right. Even in your comfortable surroundings, there are individuals whom you would turn to in times of crisis, countless faceless people you tolerate because they pose no threat to you, and a select few whom, if the world were to descend into chaos, you would eliminate without hesitation because they carry evil within them that no amount of therapy could possibly fix. But let me be clear, I am far from claiming to be a saint. If anything, I belong to the other side, the demons in hell, who see humanity for what it truly is, mostly flawed. We don't possess a conscience when it comes to the truly bad individuals because we understand that their deaths bring no harm to the world. What defines someone as bad? It's fairly simple: they are purely selfish. They only do things that benefit themselves. On the other hand, a good person, or someone who resides in the gray area between good and bad, performs certain actions for the sake of others, whether it be humans, animals, or even nurturing a beautiful garden. The truly bad individuals live day to day, just like those in the third world. They only think about their own survival. If they come across a starving child or a distressed woman, their first thought isn't about helping, it's about how they can exploit that person for personal gain. I know this because I spend most of my days eliminating the bad people who have crossed paths with other bad people, except those other bad people happen to have more money. It all started on that hillside in Afghanistan. My comrade, who cannot be named here, and I witnessed a person of interest fleeing the scene after a remote-controlled bomb attack on an American convoy. The blast left 3 men severely injured and claimed the lives of an innocent Afghan family who happened to be walking nearby. We tracked the perpetrator for hours until he disappeared, seemingly swallowed by a mountain pass. There must be a cave entrance around here, my comrade speculated. I, on the other hand, chose to strip down and explore. Luckily, I had a few extra magazines for my reliable but occasionally temperamental Beretta, as the cave complex was much larger than anticipated. It felt like being immersed in a video game. You turn a corner, shoot anyone who poses a threat, and then cautiously observe the rest. I encountered 2 armed individuals among the targets I eliminated. The third may have been innocent, but she existed in a Taliban stronghold, where even the goats are regarded with suspicion. I doubt any of them held it against me for ending their lives. According to their beliefs, they would go to a happier place. I'm inclined to agree, as this world is too peculiar not to be the result of some celestial conflict, which implies the existence of gods, and therefore an afterlife of sorts. I always found the Greek concept intriguing, where one would end up in a rather ordinary place until their memories of failures overcame them, at which point they would be reincarnated. I suspect that a fair share of these people come back as goats, destined to become objects of desire or ending up as a spicy curry, perhaps both in some twisted, ironic manner. When I emerged from that complex, my buddy had taken down a couple of mujahideen who had come charging out of one of the entrances. We retrieved a couple of AKs from them and inside the cave, ensuring that these kills would receive proper recognition. 2 verified mujahideen targets were sufficient to check off the necessary boxes for promotion, so it was time to return to base. What are your plans once we're back? Re-enlisting? My comrade asked. I shook my head. No, I replied. I came here to acquire skills, and it's painfully obvious that this war is going nowhere. I don't want to spend my life as a regular army soldier. When you return to the States, come see me in New Jersey, he suggested. I know someone who might be able to help you out. Months later, I met that person. That's when my journey into the world of contract killing began. Let me tell you, like any other business, there are various levels of expertise. Your typical clueless person seeking to eliminate their spouse usually follows the Hollywood script. They go to a seedy bar, find an individual with nothing to lose, and exchange a wad of cash. But more often than not, that person immediately goes to the police. A young sergeant makes the arrest, securing a well-deserved promotion, and the headlines capture the public's attention. People assume that this is how contract killing is done. You have probably witnessed a contract killing or two in your daily life without even realizing it. They often involve drinks. Let's say you're at a cafe, and a person dressed as a waiter delivers the drink you ordered out loud. You would likely proceed to drink it, but shortly afterward, you begin to feel queasy, prompting a quick trip to the bathroom where you vomit. It's a two-step process. The first drug induces nausea, while the second causes you to pass out. Another individual, dressed in either a trench coat or lab coat, enters the bathroom. They help you into the coat, then carry you out to a car as if you were a drunk friend. Everyone present is either paid or too terrified to say anything. That car, which was stolen a city over, now goes down to the docks or a hunting lodge. If it's the docks, a ship takes him out to the deep water, weighs you down with heavy objects, and he goes deep into the ocean before he even regains consciousness. If in the woods, they knock him out until he hears the death rattle, then strap a stake to his forehead and tie him to a tree. The wild animals do the rest. All that stuff about car crushers and funeral homes is old, like most of our Hollywood portrayal of reality, which still shows mobsters as Italians. The Dagos haven't been in charge of anything for decades. Now I'm likely working for a Ukrainian Muslim, a Vietnamese group, a Chinese Jew, or some guy of mixed parentage from Long Island who set up a dozen high-stakes card games and hired ex-SEALs to police it for him. Organized crime just means more control than two guys high on weed and meth who decide to rob a house on Saturday night. There is no grand order and honor among thieves. If you notice someone else somewhere, then that's his territory, unless you want to remove him. That's where I come in. Suppose you are from the Chinese Muslim Mafia and you notice that the Russian Jewish Mafia owns a township next door. You want in on the bread and butter of organized crime, which is sin gambling, drugs, untaxed alcohol and cigarettes, prostitution, and human trafficking, including children. If you're smart, you send some of your SEALs over there and they bring nothing but cameras. They get you a list of all of the principals and footmen involved, and soon you have a hierarchy chart. Then out go orders to people like me. Find so-and-so. He lives in these places. Criminals like to hop between multiple crash pads, goes to these places to drink, and his friends are at the following locations. How do we get our orders? Generally, I go to my favorite bagel shop. I order my lox and sesame seed, then while I eat it, I look up across the street. If the old lady in 3G hangs out her laundry, I go to her door. There's a mezuzah next to it, and I take out the folded paper. It's typed with all of the information I need. I use a lot of methods. The old KGB heart attack spray is a favorite, so is the needle to the neck. The whole point is to knock out the subject if you can, then get him into the van so he goes to disposal. If that can't be done, the preferred weapon is a silenced Ruger 22 LR pistol. Aim for the center chest, hit it at least twice, and wait for the loss of blood pressure to close the eyes. Then shoot right into an eye. The point is to have someone who is dead, and if not dead, who cannot testify because his brains are badly injured. Then your cleanup team takes the body. The toughest kills are combat kills. This means you are going after some guy, he knows you're coming, and he and his friends are armed. In this case, I take a carefully cleaned Beretta 92 FS with a suppressor, just like the M9 I used overseas, but the civilian version. The job is to go in the door and shoot everyone twice in the chest. If someone is there who you did not expect to be there, you shoot them too. Once they are all down, you do one shot to the forehead, the lobotomy shot that ensures that even if somehow they make it to a hospital and survive, they won't testify. The van takes them too. My main job is eliminating other organized crime. This doesn't happen unless someone is taking over territory or enforcing a merger. Crime is a business, and violence and disruption are expensive, unless you're going to get new territory or something. Just like in the military, I spend my days eliminating bad guys and getting paid by bad guys. I saw enough corruption, not just of the American military, but the European militaries and the politicians behind them, to stop believing in cowboys versus Indians. We're all Indians, just some get to go home. This is not to say that my life is perfect or highly paid. Eliminations are expensive. You need to have not just a shooter, but watchers. You need a driver for the van and someone to help load the bodies. You need people running the boat. You need a smith to provide the gun, or at least the barrel for an automatic, and someone in a foundry who can make those old barrels back into something else. If you are good, you have at least one local police lieutenant on your payroll to misfile the paperwork. As a shooter, you need a retirement plan. There was a reason Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. A shooter knows secrets. If all goes well, he does his job and no one notices. If someone notices, you send in a cleaner to get the cleaner. This is why there is constant turnover. The smart shooters like me move between major cities every 5 years in a cross-country zigzag. Don't move from New York to Chicago, go from New York to LA, then NOLA, then Chicago, then Seattle. The Chinese trade across the border is brutal, and then go overseas. There's good work in Europe, all very quiet. I earn enough to buy an economy sedan for each elimination. After all the tips and bribes and little costs like uniform, you'd call it a disguise, and disposal fees. Like any contractor, I pay the guys who work with me well so that I can use them again. If they mess up, I make a call, since they know the details of my eliminations. You don't want to be in a courtroom when your former buddy comes out and says, "Oh yeah, that's the guy who wanted a clean gun the day before the guy disappeared." Governments are corrupt, but they are careers, and those aspiring careerists thrive on big busts that make big headlines. And if that happens, you're going to get in big trouble in jail. My wife would be very upset to know that our basement has a secret wall, and behind it is a little workroom. There's enough normal stuff in there that you could not call it a murder factory, but that's what it is. Here I disassemble my weapons, but clean them and buff them carefully so every part slides smoothly and nothing jams. I load my own ammo so there are 0 defects, or as close as I can get. When I have everything done, I pack 2 bags, one for storage at the locker I rent down at the marina under a fake name, and the second into my working bag, which is what I will take to the scene. Like I learned in Uncle Sam's employ, I check everything 3 times but not more. You never want to start second guessing. Do each check systematically, methodically, and you end up fine. Anything else just makes you look like an amateur and, not surprisingly, commit amateur mistakes. If anyone else has touched your bag, even for a moment, call off the operation and start from the top. You want to take as little as possible with you and to pack it using gloves. Everything you do creates evidence, and part of your job is to reduce that wherever you find it. As I have said, however, your best operations involve a drug drink, a needle in the neck, or knocking someone out so that you can get them into the van. Once they are wrapped up in a carpet or stuffed in an old refrigerator going out for repair, you have done your job. The rest is just procedure, every bit as impersonal as filing your taxes, even if you are ending the life of some scumbag like yourself just trying to make a buck without a soul-wrenching office job. What you want to avoid is what we call scent. A little old lady with a telephone does more damage to our operations than a tough guy who leaps out and howls before attacking, because any scent produces an evidence trail. And that becomes suspicious when enough coincidences line up. People will ignore a detail or two, but a pattern of facts will cause a police report or worse, people to start noticing what else you are doing. You are paid to do a job, keep your mouth shut, and do so subtly. Most of the people, and it's mostly men, but there are some very vicious women out there who do this job, do it for a short term. After they have taken down their share of bad guys, they get out of town. I have an agent, just like a writer or actress, and he signals me, then takes his 10% off the top. His job is to make connections and retire after 10 years, but if something goes wrong, he has a special bottle of whiskey in his desk that will kill you dead with half a shot glass. He knows that when the battering ram hits the door, he drinks it or his family dies. It's a simple but rigid business. My morning started at dawn with a 5-mile run, as it does most days, and I had just finished up the elimination bag when I heard something upstairs. This caught me at my most vulnerable, since I was in a prosecutable position with an unlicensed firearm and, well, obvious tools of the trade like a lockpick and uniform as a repairman. If the law was busting in the door, I had one chance only, which was to find some innocent person on the sidewalk and shoot them in the leg. Cops stop a bust for wounded civilians and I can escape during that time. I quietly made my way upstairs, after securing the wall of tools that concealed my secret hideout, only to hear suspicious noises. Moving stealthily on the edges of the carpeted hallway, I caught a glimpse of my wife Lisa with a coworker she had introduced me to at their office holiday party. Though it pained me to witness this betrayal, there was nothing I could do. I could have potentially taken action, being armed with a silenced pistol. I could have eliminated the cheaters right then and there, but then I would have had to dispose of their bodies myself, and that was beyond the scope of my job. I had to be cautious, for any slip-ups in my personal life could jeopardize my employers. You see, a professional doesn't hire just one hitman. They hire two, one to do the job and one to tie up loose ends if necessary. If Lee Harvey Oswald had escaped, LBJ wouldn't have needed to make that second call. Oswald was a classic case of drifter, trained by the Reds, and essentially self-destructive, easy to replace. Instead, I reached into the room with my gloved hand and discreetly took the Mark's wallet. I carefully stashed it away in my hideout and proceeded to carry out my mission. They must have sensed my presence as they saw me approaching. 3 guys were stationed in a nearby florist shop, alert and watching the entire street. We had everything timed perfectly. I eliminated the lookouts, they were hidden away in the van, and then other members from the client's organization discreetly entered specific houses in the neighborhood. 30 members of the Russian mob became untraceable missing persons that day, and my clients potentially from even farther east swiftly moved in to establish their business within hours. Days later, I returned home. After completing a job, it was wise to lay low in a nondescript motel for a few days, ensuring all evidence was scrubbed clean. It helped to blend in with my cover story, which involved working as a traveling salesman for remote industrial controls. The job was easy, and as long as I made a few sales each month, it gave the illusion of gainful employment, just like my wife who worked as a social media consultant at a downtown bank. That's where she met Jim Keefe, an account manager or, more accurately, an accomplished loan salesman, and presumably where their affair began. Based on what I had witnessed, this wasn't their first rendezvous. I could decipher their signals, having encountered similar situations in the military, business, and even in the criminal underworld. When you respect your business partners, you don't betray them for personal gain. You return what they've dropped and say, "I apologize, but you've misplaced this." Your respect should be evident every day, for otherwise you're seen as untrustworthy, out for personal gain, and they are left with no choice but to treat you as an adversary. Unfortunately, in such scenarios, you're better off removed from the equation, because there's no I in team. Either you're fully committed or you're a liability. If Lisa respected me, she wouldn't even entertain the idea of something happening with that other man. Women know how to signal their intentions. There's a smile that suggests a colleague is harmless, and that conversation won't go beyond casual water cooler talk. There's a different, more formal smile reserved for interactions with parents. Funny enough, I realized that my line of work essentially involved the removal of bodies. One of my older contacts, a man from Poland who had emigrated after the fall of communism, once told me that the best wife is one who doesn't give it all away freely. She might engage in certain activities with a partner she's dating, but she doesn't give her all. She understands that business is business, and until there's a firm commitment, nothing is set in stone. She patiently waits for the one. Anything else is simply foolish and naive. Lisa was somewhat similar to that ideal. I grew up in a household where obedience to my mother was intertwined with religion, and obedience to my father meant working diligently. Society glorifies hard work, but the military taught me that working efficiently and effectively is far more important. It doesn't matter if it takes 10 seconds or 10 weeks, as long as the job is completed correctly on the first attempt. People in regular jobs often work hard, spending their time on meticulous paperwork, but those who truly succeed are the ones who work efficiently and get results. That holds true in my line of work, too. Once I knew someone tasked with eliminating a high-profile target. He could have spent countless hours studying 12 different approaches, but instead he spent just 30 minutes observing the target. The Mark had a specific inclination for indulging in alcohol and the company of questionable individuals in a hidden room at the very top of his mansion, accessible only by a narrow wooden staircase. My acquaintance disguised himself as a delivery person, ascended the stairs, and intentionally spilled lubricant on the second step from the top. The target tripped, fell, and it appeared as though his demise was an unfortunate accident resulting from his lifestyle, a topic no one wished to discuss, especially with the conspicuous tube of cherry-flavored anal lube left at the scene. On the other hand, my father worked an ordinary day job when he could have achieved so much more. Despite his commitment and hard work, he never attained that big breakthrough. The people who climbed the ladder at the auto plant were those who actively networked. They built relationships with the unions, suppliers, and clients. They made arrangements with a simple handshake, perhaps bending the rules a bit. They secured lucrative contracts, promotions, and luxurious houses. In contrast, my father only received a desk and a gold watch. But if I ever came home and wasn't hard at work on some school assignment, I would find myself on the receiving end of his willow switch, hidden behind the television. My mother exemplified the classic manipulator, driven by narcissism. She had me read a Bible verse every day and demanded that I recite it to her. If I failed to seek her out with a new verse, the tension in the house would become palpable. If I made a mistake, I would be treated as a nobody. No words, no food, no attention until I humbly crawled back to her on my hands and knees with a freshly memorized Bible verse. As I stood on those stairs, listening to my wife engage in animalistic activities with someone else, I felt a desire to clutch the firm leather of a Bible in my hands. You may think it impossible for a spouse to be abusive without physical violence, but I can assure you it happens. Just like my mother, Lisa coerced me into submission, making me believe that I was worthless unless I fulfilled her every desire. She would threaten to withdraw her affection and engage in vindictive behavior if I failed to comply. In this case, she wanted something who knows what, as she never confided in me, and because I couldn't provide it, she decided to stab me in the back. If a powerful individual had ordered my execution, would she have simply allowed it to happen? It is quite possible. She no longer wanted an honest and devoted husband. Her love for me had withered away over time. Lisa entered my life when I returned from overseas. My first priority was finding an apartment, and she happened to manage a small complex that I found appealing due to its tranquility, allowing me to hear the voices in my head more clearly. Just kidding. Those voices make themselves heard regardless, like echoes of my mother. Nonetheless, she promptly suggested that, despite my probable failure to meet the financial requirements, I could still obtain the apartment if I had a specific credit card with a good standing. A few hours of financial activity later, I secured the apartment, and I started to see her around once a week. Eventually, I mustered the courage to ask her out in an effort to alleviate the growing tension. At that time, she was already in the process of divorcing her first husband, which should have been a warning sign. She claimed they had gotten married while in college, and that she was a virgin. I didn't know him, and her college was 1,000 miles away. Perhaps I should have done some investigative work. However, this was before I became cynical about everything, truly cynical, as only experience can make you. I assumed she had no reason to lie. 7 years later, we were apparently in a joyful marriage, or so I thought. We even contemplated starting a family. But deep down, I was aware that my attraction to her physical beauty ultimately led to our union, causing me to question my own judgment. Lisa possessed classic Norwegian-Irish beauty. Vibrant red hair, an array of freckles, a slender figure. Her smile could brighten an entire room, as the cliché suggests, and she had a natural charm that drew people in, despite her modest role as an apartment manager at the time. With the first 6 murders I committed, I financially supported her journey to gain social media management certifications. Little did I know that I was not the destination, but merely a stepping stone to greater achievements for Lisa. With her new job at a prominent bank and her boyfriend, who was on track to becoming an esteemed account executive, she was on her way to a grand existence. No more dwelling in our small house in a humble neighborhood. She would now have a fashionable address, a flashy car, and spending power. I couldn't compete with that. Yet it wasn't the corporate lifestyle that appealed to me. It reminded me too much of my parents, who worked diligently only to realize, once they reached their 60s, that their dreams were futile. They sacrificed their younger years for a dream that, like everything else in this modern world, turned out to be an illusion. They had managed to attain material success, worked out on treadmills, and were well known within their community. But retirement came, suddenly reducing them to nobody. Just faceless individuals with enough money to get by, yet not enough to be desired as friends or achieve fame. They separated and likely reside in retirement homes now, unknown and alone. Our wedding was a lavish affair, partially funded by her parents, with many of her college friends in attendance. Perhaps I should have noticed how meticulously she kept me away from them. Was she by my side out of genuine love or to hide her ambitions and questionable moral values? Doubt began to pervade every aspect of our relationship. As I pondered her unfaithfulness, I didn't feel the rage that many men report. Instead, I felt a profound sense of sorrow. I mourned the death of something I believed to be beautiful. Even if she came crawling back to me with Bible verses in hand, I knew what resided within her, and I no longer desired it. I felt loss and emptiness, and nothing more. Before you pass judgment, consider how little we truly know about anyone. As children, we move around frequently as our parents chase after career opportunities. Then we are shipped off to school or training, seeking the qualifications necessary for a successful future. But what happens if a company goes under, merges, moves, or changes course? We find ourselves uprooted once again. Our knowledge of those we encounter in daily life is limited to their behavior. Who have they been with? Who knows? That knowledge would give us insight into whether they lean more toward being a keeper or a player in the realm of committed relationships. If we had a fighting chance at a marriage that wouldn't self-destruct, we would receive an extensive background report similar to that of a used car. We could speak to their childhood friends, teachers, and first love. We could hear from those who knew them during their college years. But alas, society is designed by greedy and deceitful individuals to bury any wrongdoings, allowing them to perpetuate their grand scheme. We are left knowing next to nothing about our partners beyond what they choose to reveal. In my case, believing everything Lisa told me proved to be a grave mistake. At this moment, she posed more of a practical dilemma. I had to extricate myself from this disastrous marriage while preserving my cover story and keeping my activities hidden. Ideally, she would simply leave me, allowing me to file for abandonment. However, knowing her narcissistic tendencies, I suspected she would demand more. People like her thrive on humiliating others, as it keeps them in a position of power. Rising mafiosi often employ this tactic, only to discover that it earns them no loyalty. As soon as someone can trade up, they will, just as they had done before. It's a quick path to a watery grave. For now, my priority was the mission at hand. I figured I had 3 more targets before it would be time to relocate once again. I was contemplating making a clean break. I had a secondary set of documents, as a fail-safe, and all the earnings from my night job were invested in bearer bonds safely stored in a deposit box. But first, I had to deal with Lisa. My household needed to be in order. If those living under the same roof as you are not fully committed, they will inevitably become curious and possibly uncover something they shouldn't. I approached my handler and explained the situation. It's always better to admit your mistakes rather than hide or lie about them, as that puts everyone above you in danger. That's unfortunate, he replied in his old-world voice. She seemed like a nice girl. I suppose it would be convenient if she were to disappear, wouldn't it? You might say I am naive for not noticing my unfaithful wife had a different personality instead of a kind one arguable, but I knew something was off. No way. We don't mix things up. I'm going to leave and stop giving her money so she'll leave me, then file for separation. He tapped his head. I like the way you're thinking, but my old friend, you are one of the best. So I suggest an agreement with an understanding. And so instead of cutting her off, I excitedly went home with a big smile on my face. Honey, I got a promotion. We're going on a vacation. She pretended to be thrilled, but as soon as I turned away, she started texting. Just a short one, I said. We'll go to the Cayman Islands for a few days. It won't interfere with your job at all, I promise. How could you do that, she asked. A friend of mine, an older Polish man, has a yacht, I explained. They're going to Dubai afterwards. We can fly back on standby, save our money for some nice dinners and dancing. Maybe you'll need some new clothes. That convinced her. And so, we found ourselves boarding the yacht at a fancy club. My friend always said to go all out because no one suspected anything when you spent a lot of money and weren't afraid of being seen. It's like having security lights, he said. Research shows they don't really work, but humans are so silly, he tapped his head, they think that if everything is visible and people are around, nothing bad can happen. They're like animals. He had a point. My wife wanted to control me, to change me, and to domesticate me. She wanted to have power over me. Like my mother, she wanted me to participate in activities to show loyalty. My mother was actually an atheist, but wanted people in the church to like her so she could attend fancy dinner parties. The more random and absurd the activity, the better, because it demonstrated how easily controlled I was, just like politicians and celebrities manipulate voters. It would be amusing if it wasn't so pitiful. Our first night at sea began when the drinks were served. My friend, let's call him John to keep things simple, appeared looking incredible. He had a fancy watch, gold chains, a well-fitted suit, a large Cuban cigar, and a glass of aged whiskey in his hand. With his salesman voice, he asked my wife what she'd like to drink. From that moment on, he had her full attention, sharing made-up stories from his past. I couldn't help but realize how much I'd miss him someday. Although we were more colleagues than friends, he was still a friend-like figure, at the very least. Later that night, as I settled into our cabin, I checked my watch. It was almost time. The door opened and Lisa walked in. Without even looking at me, she went straight to the small bathroom to freshen up in front of the fancy mirror. Then, she came out and made her proposal. I want you to do something for me, she said. I haven't been with other men. She glanced down with a shy expression. I didn't realize acting was part of her social media consultant training. Training. Such a normal word. It sounds like someone teaching you how to use the bathroom or how to behave. Anyway, I responded the way I knew I should, thanks to all the movies I've seen. Of course, darling, I said. I'll do. I stretched out the word, teasing her anything for you. That was the key phrase. Your friend is so charming, she remarked. Just for tonight, and tonight only, I want to be with him. It's just an experience for me. After this, I'll come back to you and be completely devoted to you forever. It's just one night, and then I'll come back to you. I guess the man she had her eye on, who was vying for an account executive position, wasn't doing so well, probably because his wallet was found at a known drug location. So, she was aiming for an upgrade. A word of advice: someone who is always looking for something better will never be satisfied. They'll keep searching until something stops them. My friend had actually planned to say, leave the loser and let's explore the world together. She could be his personal assistant with perks and receive her own fancy watch and vintage bourbon. But I had to act too. Lisa, we can't. What about our vows? Forsaking all others, till death do us part. She smiled coyly. I'll make it up to you, she said in a sultry tone, like my mother used to. I'm doing this for us. If it's just one night, why does it matter, I said, nodding like a normal person, agreeing but not really. It would break my heart, honey. I glanced out the window at the dark waves of the ocean crashing alongside us. Life goes on, after all. We're just passengers. She wrapped her arm around my shoulder. Everything will be fine, I promise, she said, sounding similar to my mother. Just read the Bible verse. Don't question me yet, and I won't change anything. You can always be my little mistreated boy, suffering in a subtle way even before you go off to war zones. Nothing would change if I just followed along. If I didn't, there would be conflict, and I might lose everything. That's the cycle of abuse. But I was too skeptical to do anything other than pretend, like a Hollywood actor. I even shed a few tears. He's just a few doors down, in room number 2, she revealed. The beauty had faded, and all I saw was deception and deceit hidden within the rotten flower. It was time to give in. I don't know, honey. This seems strange, and it's like you don't respect me anymore. I'll respect you more, she said. In the morning. Overcome your primitive ape-like desire to possess me. Mature past treating me like a car or those fancy laptops you like. Grow up. If you're a confident person, you'll see how this makes our love even stronger and our relationship better. Just one night, and then I'm yours until the end of time. I looked down, tears in my eyes, and nodded dumbly. Good person, she said, and hugged me like my parents used to as I sat crying while reciting the verse of the day. It was too bad because I actually liked the Bible and the deity of jealous vengeance that was in it. They knew that to love something was to want to possess it, not for your sake, but to guide it and make it part of you. She had rejected all of this without understanding. I hugged her back and then she was gone. An hour later, I stood on the deck, enjoying one of my host's Cubans. The mellow, vanilla flavor with a hint of spice and cream soothed my mind. I was also making quite a show of drinking his wonderful honey buttersweet bourbon as if it were a fancy non-alcoholic beverage. My host joined me. She took door number 2, he said. As you said she would, I said, stepping back a little unsteadily. He patted my back. Don't feel bad. That's the slave cabins. With her luggage, toiletries, medications, and clothing gone, the authorities would view this one as a classic case of a spouse running away from a sad and naive partner. Thank you, old friend, what are friends for? He asked, and strode off to join the party, which I knew would go until dawn. I waited until he was gone and then went back into my cabin, chucking regretfully the Cuban over the side. Lisa had brought an overnight bag, but I had a full suitcase. I unzipped it, removed a layer of evening clothing, and took out the 2 objects inside, then went to the deck. The raft inflated with a capsule, and I mounted the little motor on it easily. Remembering my military training to the letter, I lowered myself and the boat, then launched into the wake. You see, you always have to ask yourself, what would I do if I were this person? The answer, if you want to protect yourself, is to always tie up loose ends. Lisa was a loose end, and that made me a loose end. If her parent or job called, I might blab. That meant that I had to be missing, presumed dead, and there was no moment more ripe for it than now. Person loses their partner, gets overwhelmed, and decides to start a new life. No loose ends for my Polish friends or our employers, who he had surely informed. I motored off toward the South Carolina coast, new identity and valuable bonds in a hidden wallet across my gut, and did my best to forget everything about my life, now gone, receding with the tossed wake of the boat.